Hi, this is Greg Nicolette. I am here today with a session unpacking video. Today it's about a track I just released on Spotify called And They All Fall Down. I have the cover art up here for you, which was made by my beautiful wife, Jessica Rivas. And I wanted to talk about this for a couple reasons. First, just to basically give you a song exploder type look into how I created the piece. And then also to talk a bit about demoing in general and just what that life is like for a composer, because demoing on other projects takes about 30% of my time. And if you reach a certain level of success, you'll probably find yourself doing the same thing. So hopefully you can get a bit out of this. Happy to answer any questions you have in the comments about demoing or the piece. Um, yeah, so I guess the first thing to say was that this was a demo for a horror project, but not a project that had been made yet. I met a director, Meredith, at a party, and she was telling me about a script that she was currently shopping around, trying to get cast to sign on, get funding. And I asked her if she would send it over. I gave it a read and was really into it. I thought that the religious undertones in it were really interesting. It's basically about it's a modern story about an ancient sect of Catholicism called the Cathar religion. And I asked her if it would be cool if I wrote some music for her inspired by it. I'd never worked with her before, so this was a good opportunity to kind of unofficially collaborate on something. And of course, she said yes, right? I mean, who wouldn't if you had somebody offering to write theme music for you? And so I got started. And the first thing that I found was this hymn called Le Bouvier that was associated with the Cathars. Le Bouvier translates to the herdsman, and it's got super creepy lyrics. Things like, let's see, who is buried here? It is the poor Johanna. When I'm dead, in the deepest basement, bury me. Things like that, right? Not stuff that you'd necessarily expect to hear in a religious hymn, but perfect for a horror film. And so I was sure what I was going to do for this demo was arrange this piece, which basically means in composer terms, take the melody and then kind of make it my own by harmonizing it and writing different music around it. The other arrangements I'd heard of it were all very meditative and contemplative. Even though the lyrics are dark, the idea was still that if you sang this hymn, it would be sort of in a positive contemplative space. I of course wanted to bring that into the horror space, so I went a lot darker with it. I also wanted to write a piece that had different sections in it to show Meredith that I had range, and also just to generate thematic ideas for different parts of the score. And so I'll take you through each section, starting with the first section here. And in this section, I do sort of adapt a rather meditative approach to the piece, but again, with sort of an ounce of tension that keeps it squarely in the horror genre. So let's give this a listen, and then I will unpack it a bit. All right, that's hurting. You heard a bit of section two there as things got a little bit more crazy. This first section, I did want to sort of capture this idea of a religious chant, right? But again, in a way that felt a little bit more unsettling than some of the other arrangements I'd heard. And so I started thinking about, sort of the tropes in religious music, the use of an organ, the use of drones. I didn't want to use organ because I felt that that would have too much baggage associated with it. And so I decided to make use of a string quartet. And specifically, I started exploring these really lovely harmonics patches that Spitfire made for their solo strings library. Not just harmonics, flotando to basically a lot of the more soft and intense patches. They're really good with that over at Spitfire, creating like sort of big sounds from very quiet sources. So what I have here are basically two layers, and you can think of these two layers as the different stops in an organ. If you're familiar with an organ, there are different kinds of pipes that have different timbres associated with them. And so I was sort of thinking that here by using the flotando on the solo violin. And pairing that with harmonics played on the upright bass. And together they sound like this. I just love that sound of the bass up in that high range because there's a certain unsettled quality of an instrument that's designed to play very low, suddenly playing very high, right? It's unnatural in a way. And one of the other things that I'm doing here to sort of keep the listener, you as the listener, on your toes, is I'm constantly shifting meter. If you look at my meter here, it changes from, starts in 6/8, has a moment of 3/8, back to 6/8, switches to 4/8, and back to 3/8. So I'm basically always shifting it so that you don't have a center of gravity, basically. I want you to be feeling like the music is constantly shifting under your feet. Okay, so we have the organ, we have the meter shifting, and then of course the most important element, those vocals. We actually didn't have a stereo mic, or my the vocalist I was working with didn't have a stereo mic. We were doing this remotely, so we just double tracked it in mono, and then layered it. So we have left channel, right channel, and both channels, which gives us a nice big sound. Of course, had to add a lot of reverb too, with it off, and with it on. Makes a big difference. All right, so one of the things that we struggle with when using vocals as composers is how to mock it up, right? Because you just can't. You sort of can with plugins today. There's been some pretty amazing plugins that have come out from ADO and East West that try to include word builders and really get you close to what a singer might sing. But I often find that that sort of leaves you in this weird uncanny valley of, oh, it's almost real, it's sort of what I want. And then I start feeling my habits pushing me towards, well, I should just make it sound good for the samples because who knows if I can record it, right? And that's a really dangerous place to be, especially for a demo. Because with a demo, I'm trying to show a director exactly what I would do if I had a budget, right? And I just can't be limited by samples in that way because it really just slots me into a very limited set of creative choices. And so what I did here while mocking this up was I didn't use anything close to anything sounding real. This is what it sounded like before I sent it to the vocalists. I'm using just the most basic contact patch. This is the one that comes with the Contact Factory library. Sounds nothing like the real thing, and that's good because really what it forced me to do was make sure my brain was always imagining what it would sound like and not getting pulled into what the samples were telling me it should sound like, right? Really important and something I really recommend trying out on your end, especially as samples get better and we are more and more tempted to just go with them. Now, of course, I did have to pay them. They were friends of mine, so they were sort of doing me a favor, but I also had to throw them a few dollars to do this. So there is that consideration, which brings up sort of another aspect of demoing, which is that they cost money, right? Oftentimes they're not paid. This is one that I volunteered to do, but even if it was a quote-unquote official demo, there wouldn't necessarily be any money. In fact, I've never been paid for a demo, whether it's for the biggest streaming network or the smallest indie film. And it's really up to you to decide. Well, first, if you can't afford it, that's a privilege that I feel freely admit, and it's only one that I can afford because I happen to have a recurring job writing music for Disney right now, and so I can afford to spend a few $100s here and there on a demo. But it's just something to keep in mind. It's sort of a cost of doing business, and if you can make your demos without musicians, all the better. But if you need them, it's something you're going to have to factor in. All right, so part one really covers that chant-like meditative religious vibe that I was looking for. Part two gets a lot crazier. Let's take a listen to it. All right. So I love how that turned out. I wanted to show you the score, so I pulled that up during the listening session just to show you what the musicians were seeing. And by the way, this is all done in Cubase. I'm one of the only composers I know that really likes the score editor in Cubase. I think it looks great. I think this looks almost 100% professional. Usually I would actually separate the vocals on different lines, but because they were basically singing, there is a fancy word for this, when they're all singing the same melody and harmony, monophonically maybe. I didn't see the need for it. I actually thought it would be easier for them to see it all laid out together. But yeah, from a notation standpoint, I think they have everything they need. I'm able to put directions in the score. Like, for example, I have out of control wail for this section at 25. I didn't know exactly what I would get there. I just wanted to hear what they came up with, and it sounded great, so I left it in. Agro-nasal shape singing is another direction. I had been doing a lot of listening to a vocal group called Kitka, and also to Appalachian shape singing, which is it's an American form of singing where it's just all the sounds are brought up into the nose, and so you really resonate the head, right? I love that sound, and so I thought it would be really interesting to pull into this. It wasn't necessarily derived from the Cathar connection, but I just thought it sounded kind of creepy, so we went with it. So what else is happening here? This section for me is really the meat of the score. Like, I'm really playing with different sounds. I'm sort of exploring the string quartet a bit more. I'm keeping the instrumentation relatively small, but also trying to make it sound big while doing so. So I have mostly solo strings. I have a prepared piano patch, some piano effects tracks, some aleatoric string swells, and then a couple of sort of synthy tracks. Let's start with those. Let's listen to this string swell track from, it's just called Synth Bass from Albion. Okay, so this is a track from their Albion 1 library, which I still think is one of their absolute best. It's got the orchestra, it's got synthesizers, it's got percussion, it's got aleatoric effects. It's amazing. And the cool thing about Albion 1 is that all of these instruments in the quote-unquote synth section are, it's actually called Darwin's Steam Band, I believe. What is it called? Yeah, Stevenson's Steam Band, sorry. They're all derived from acoustic sources. So rather than a pure synth, which certainly sounds can certainly sound dark and menacing. It doesn't have that sort of added technology, techno side to it that I think can just pull me out of a score sometimes. I wanted the score to feel really grounded and organic. So I like that these sounds are they sound modern but are still sort of grounded in acoustic material. So I've got that going. I've got my aleatoric strings. And then I've got a pulse going here. All that's sitting under the vocals. And what I love about scoring is that you can take just those elements, and that could be a tension scene, right? Just that could drive. If I pull the bass up a little bit. And there you go, you got a horror score basically, right? So that's what I'm thinking about here when I'm creating this demo is, can I pull these layers apart and can I create more material from it later down the line? Just to hear it one more time all together. I've also got some weird percussion. And a lot of these are all sort of quirky patches, right? Like I'm using, this is from Spitfire. It's one of their contact libraries. You need the full version to use it. It's from their Glass and Steel library. It's just a really simple, it's just a real simple, I think it's like a struck. Could be a struck, like a felt hammer on a glass that's pitched down. Sounds great though, using this sort of disturbing motive I'm developing. Right? But still small. And I'm also using this, let's see, we've got 8DO cigar box. This is from their, that's a really goofy sound, right? It could be in the right context. It almost sounds cartoony. But in context of everything else, it's sort of just part of the texture, right? And it just makes me feel a little, makes me feel a little off kilter hearing that kind of sound. It's from their Misfits library, which is one of my favorite lines of instruments from them, just because they're very simple, not that many controls, but a lot of sort of weird, unexpected sounds. I mean, you could do a whole piece just based on that, right? And then finally, this last element is this flying hand percussion bottle track. I'm not exactly sure how they recorded this one. It's a plastic bottle, so it's probably like one of those water jugs you can get from the supermarket. You can come up with amazing sounds with the simplest of instruments. And if I had more time, I might have actually just done that myself. I did a whole score based around coffee cans and wrenches once. It's amazingly effective, especially in sort of a studio environment where you don't have to worry about, oh, is this really going to balance with the orchestra or anything like that. It's really just what the sound is that matters. Let's see, what else to say about this section? So I talked a bit about the vocals being monophonic, and that continues here. I chose some really tight harmonies. Let's pull up the vocal score. And let's solo the vocals. And I chose those tight harmonies so that that nasal quality would really resonate and really come through. Let's pick another section here, 41. And when you get a vocal trio that's so good as they are, these tight harmonies, even though they're seconds and minor seconds apart, they still sound beautiful in voices. It's a very different feel having tight harmonies with vocals than with live instruments. Live instruments, like instrumental instruments, like a violin, if they were playing this, it would sound a lot more grating, almost psycho-ish. But with vocals, there's still a sort of warmth to it. All right, so let's see what else have we got here. Yeah, that about covers that section. I want to move on to section 3. Now this section is almost a left turn for the piece. And honestly, if I was going to finish this piece and flush it out to something longer, I probably would have developed this section more and then returned to something I've done in the piece earlier. Honestly, for this demo, I just didn't think it was necessary. This section of the piece continues to use lyrics from Le Bouvier, but I'm writing my own melody at this point and just sort of exploring what else I can do with this vocal trio. Let's take a listen. All right, so very different than the previous two sections. Maybe a little bit more, I don't want to say stereotypically horror, but you know, I'm definitely sort of playing on some tropes from the genre of a light choir that almost sounds like a children's choir. It's sort of inherently creepy, those short notes. I'm cool with that. I feel like this movie has a lot of darkness in it, but also it's sort of a classic. It's got a certain classicness to it as well, where drawing on like a John Carpenter or, you know, I guess it sort of sounds like Poltergeist, you might say. It's also kind of inspired by Michael Abel's work in Us and Get Out. So what's happening here is a lot less dissonance and a lot more tonality, right? So we have simple chords, simple melodies, simple rhythms, and it's also a whole new tempo, right? So it has a totally different feel. And in a new instrument, right? The piano, which again can be overused. I have already used it earlier. I mentioned as a prepared piano patch. I should go back and just play you what that sounds like. In case you're not familiar with what prepared piano is, it's basically when you take the cover off the piano and you put weird objects in the strings so that when the hammer hits it, it sort of changes the resonance, right? John Cage is one of the more well-known composers to use it, but lots of people use it now, and you'll hear it all over different film scores and modern, contemporary, classical music. It's really cool effect. Since I am using piano earlier, I felt like it was, you know, we might as well explore it in its sort of more tonal form. I also love minimalist music, so I wanted there to be sort of room in the score for simple, minimalist piano pieces like this. I wanted to double it with something that was slightly unexpected, though, and so I'm using this instrument called Kinetic Toys by Contact. I'll bring this up in the mix a bit so you can hear it. It's sort of a distorted music box sound. Right? I love sounds where where they seem sort of familiar, but you don't quite know what it is. That's sort of my thinking there with that. And now, plus also the string quartet is still in, although not until much later. Let's hear what they're doing here at the end. So a lot of the simplicity of the first part of the piece, a little bit more harmonic motion. I'm using a solo cello patch in Divisi, and I have the vibrato turned all the way down. This is still the Spitfire patch. Now, if I turn the vibrato up, hear that shaking that comes in? Sounds a little bit more conventional, right? A little bit more maybe expected. With it out, it's a little bit more unsettling, a little more medieval sounding. In early music practices, there's an instrument called the viola da gamba, which is very similar to the cello, and it's often played without reverb. So I'm sort of capturing a bit of that here with this cello part. I still have the violins in here on the flotando that we talked about before. There it is, flotando. And those bass harmonics that were in before. So I'm giving a little bit of unity to the score here, even though the melodic material is so different. Yeah, so and there you have it. I have, three distinct sections, hopefully giving Meredith a lot of ideas for different ways music can support the movie. Yeah, I guess that's about it. If you haven't, please check the track out on whatever streaming service you fancy. It's on Spotify, Apple Music, probably a few other ones too. And thanks for watching. Feel free to ask me any questions in the comments below about demoing in general or anything specific about the piece. And yeah, see you in the next one. Thanks.